integrating livestock into no-till farming systems. He's a long-standing career as a grazing specialist and has helped a lot of folks with this. So, Mr. Gerrish, here you go.
Thank you very much. You can have that one. I'll use this one. Hey, yeah, it's great to be back here again. I've spoken at this conference a couple times in the past. Beautiful Burlington, Colorado. You know, we all know why the tourists all want to come to Colorado, but it ain't Burlington, is it? But it's great farming country, especially if you're trying to do it right, trying to keep this country from blowing away. I think that's why most of you are here. And then there's always the livestock side of it we want to bring back. So they asked me to talk about, does this work? Huh. Okay, it does work. Very easy touch. So, you know, farming years ago, like when I was growing up, farming almost automatically included livestock as well, and then it kind of went the path of farming, well, we'll have some hogs, but we won't have cows anymore. And then the hogs went, and now a lot of farming operations incorporating livestock means they got 10 laying hens out back so they have fresh eggs. But we want to think about it in a bigger, broader way, but there are actually some challenges that have developed over the last couple generations, like no fences, no stock water, no corrals, no livestock, and in a lot of cases, no experience. Yet we have this surge of farmers wanting, I gotta find where my bounds are, of farmers wanting to bring livestock back on. And so, you know, this is the question. Our parents and grandparents spent, you know, the last two generations trying to get rid of livestock from the farm. Why do you want them back? And I gotta use a line here that I didn't actually even remember saying it, but a couple years, and I can't remember if it was at this conference, it may have been No-Till on the Plain, when I said the saddest divorce that has happened down on the farm was the divorce of land and the cattle. Yeah. Somebody told me it was the greatest line I'd ever used, and so I figured I'd better trot it out again. So why do we want to get them back again? Incorporate perennials into crop rotations. Again, and I recognize there are some people here older than me, but I'm getting to be, you know, one of the older folks around. And when I grew up on the farm in Illinois, and yes, I grew up a flatland Illinois crop farmer. I got over that. But when I was growing up, we still did, you know, crop rotations. Corn followed sod, period. That's the way it was done. Corn followed sod. And usually that was plowing out 3 to 4 years of a perennial sod. And at that time we thought it was all about nitrogen. Just, you know, if you plant, you know, alfalfa out there or grass and clover, you get nitrogen fixation in it, puts nitrogen in the soil, and then you plow that and you can grow a crop of corn. I have a vague memory of the first time my dad ever bought fertilizer, because he began moving away from the crop rotation and the sod. But I remember when that's how everybody farmed. The land was only bared to grow a crop for a couple of years, and then it was covered up again. Management flexibility, other ways of dealing with weeds than just spraying them. Animals become a way to consume those. Those weeds are out there capturing solar energy and creating protein and digestible carbohydrates. It's just the combine doesn't like to eat that stuff. But man, cows or sheep or goats will. Product diversity, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Break disease cycles, that's another thing that crop rotations do, is break disease cycles of the crops, but also having pasture rotated out, cropping on it a couple years. that can break some of the livestock diseases. And now over the last 10 to 15 years, you know, in my view, the most exciting thing going on in agriculture is this rediscovery that the soil is the foundation of our life, that it's a living, breathing, functioning organism, and to be successful in the farming business, truly successful, that is what we need to be relying on, is functional soil. And livestock are a key component of that soil restoration, because if something has been farmed conventionally and chemically for a generation, there's not much life in that soil. Ruminant animals are big walking vats of microbes. And microbes come out the front end when they graze, microbes come out the back end when they defecate. And so we use the livestock to bring life back to the soil. So that's why we want to have those livestock there. And I just, somebody else, I don't remember, but on LinkedIn in the regenerative discussion group, I just saw that somebody else had talked about cover crops as being the gateway drug of regenerative farming. And absolutely they are. Cover crops are the easiest way to get from conventional heavy tillage farming into regenerative farming, of rebuilding the soil. So, and as a matter of fact, there are some people who just want to get out of farming and plant perennial pastures, and I'm all about perennial pastures. You know, that's where most of my career, 45 years now, I've been involved with grazing management of perennial pasture. So yeah, I'd love to see everything covered up in perennial pasture, but you don't get there overnight. And our recommendation to farmers is usually to go through 2 or 3, at a minimum, annual cover crop cycles before they seed the ground down to a perennial. And that's to bring life back into the soil. It's allowed you to deal with some weed issues via the cover crop transition. But cover crops, we can put them out there, and we have different objectives with it. You know, cover crops aren't a new idea, but we have a broader perspective of what they really mean and what their value is. So 40 years ago, if you planted a cover crop, it was almost entirely just about control soil erosion, control soil erosion. We get a crop off, we get it covered up again to try to save soil. 40 years ago, that's what cover crops were about. Now it's building soil health, pollinator habitat, and for an increasing number of farmers, it is feed for livestock, because we're getting the cows and the land back together and they need something to eat. Cover crops can be very high quality feed. I mean, it is beef, choice beef finishing quality feed if you're managing it, you know, and effectively with that objective in mind. So it's very high quality feed, but also we can use them to create just a lot of cow maintenance quality feed to take us through the winter, so we're not going through the expense of baling up hay, chopping silage, that. So we're going to use different strategies, different types of cover crops, different timing and degree of use based on what those objectives are. And we need to think in terms of, we have above ground objectives and we have below ground objectives. The above ground objectives, you know, it's soil cover, soil protection, but then we bring in feeding the livestock aspect of it. And some people are more about building the soil, creating litter, organic matter, building the soil. Some people are more about feeding the livestock. So you need to know specifically what your objectives are there. And then the below ground objectives, we say, well, the cows aren't eating below ground, but you know what? If we eat too much off the top with the cows, it does have an impact on what's going on below ground, and it's going to affect our below ground objectives. which are stimulating soil biology, build that organic matter, build soil structure, conserve soil nutrients. So talking some about the science, and I got to go over here and get my bottle of water. Some speakers would howl at me if I did that. And I don't mean other speakers sitting in the crowd, I mean the speakers. They're always listening. So I'm actually just getting over a cold. A common cold. Been 15 years at a minimum since I've had a cold. And so a couple of weeks ago, when I started having the symptoms, because I never get a cold, I had to presume it was COVID. And so last Friday, I did go to the healthcare center in Chalice to get tested for COVID, hoping that it wasn't, because I probably wasn't going to fly down here and join you in this conference if I was packing COVID. And so, no. And by the way, I'm way beyond being infectious. They already told me that. But I got tested for COVID, influenza A, influenza B, the rhinovirus, and they were all negative. And the guy said, "You just got a cold." and it is weird. And the reason I don't get sick very often is because I eat real food. That's another whole topic of discussion. But I do need to keep rehydrating myself here. Okay, Kevin Wiltsey. Do you remember this day? Where are you, Kevin? Well, this is on Kevin Wiltsey's farm a couple hours south here. And it was one of the most impressive cover crops that I've ever seen, because as soon as the cows passed into it, you never saw them. You could hear them crashing in there, you know, like elephants running through the jungle. You've all seen those movies where it's all around you, but I can't see them, and then huge elephants come out. What was the objective on that particular cover crop? Was it to create biomass to get litter on the soil and tromp a lot of things in, or was it feed cattle? He got a heck of a lot of litter there, but and the cows were fat, I will admit. You know, they were knocking this stuff down and grazing there. But it also brings us in this question of, if you are going to bring livestock back onto the farm to help your soil development objectives, what should that livestock be? In this case, it should have been giraffes, but he could not get, you know, a herd of giraffes for custom grazing on here. So we try not to let the cover crops get this big, but we also don't want to graze them that severely, because you look at this cover crop here that's been grazed, and I'll guarantee you the animals aren't performing all that well on that pasture, because we're pushing them too far. We're asking them to eat a lot more indigestible stem material. We're lowering, it started, you can see on the left side over there, there's quite a bit of biomass standing out there, but that's not all high quality edible feed. And so we've got to let the animals waste some of this so that we continue to accomplish our soil building strategy. So this is an example of a cover crop being grazed where we're probably not accomplishing either our livestock objective or our soil building objective. So we're always looking for that balance point. We don't need it to be 12 feet tall, but we need to leave more than, 6 or 8 inches on that type of cover crop, 6 or 8 inches, if we're trying to actually contribute additional organic matter to the soil there. I'm going to say, to effectively graze, we do have to have some infrastructure out there. We need some management tools. And those management tools are basically stock water and fence. So we got to kind of get over this hurdle Farmers don't like fence. The gates are always too small. Have you ever considered maybe the equipment's too big? They tear out fences when they turn with their equipment. Well, you could have started a little sooner. They can't farm to the road edge, up to the edge of the pavement. If you got a fence there, you can't farm to the edge of the pavement. I'll tell you what, having a fence over on that crop ground just a little bit, that's far less problematic than having the fence a little too far into the pavement. You put a fence down in the middle of the field to give you an electrical source to hook your polywire fences on. My God, we've lost 3 feet of farmland through there. Well, how does that compare to the tons and tons and tons and tons of land that was lost, that blew away because we weren't keeping the land covered? Weeds propagate in fence lines. Now, there's a bit of truth to this one, especially if you spray Roundup on your fence lines No, isn't that the other way? If you spray your fence lines with Roundup, you won't have any weeds there for that couple months. But then they come back with a vengeance there because there's no competition to keep. Well, I don't know what did that. To keep the weeds from growing there. The more we use herbicides to control and fight weeds, the more weeds we have to fight. Ironic, isn't it? Yeah. Bottom line used to say blah, 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 but I thought that really wasn't being polite to, my host sometimes, and so I put et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's the polite way of saying blah, blah, blah. So there's this ongoing conflict between having fence out there and, still wanting to grow a crop. And more people are realizing that they want to have the livestock out there. And if they've been to very many conferences, especially where Jim Gerrish was talking, they know they got to move those animals on a regular basis to get all the beneficial effects out of there. And so how are we going to do this? How are we going to bring fences back onto farmland? How are we going to provide livestock water out there? And that network of infrastructure within the industry, we call it a grazing cell. How are we going to turn our farmland into a grazing cell? We have 2 basic approaches to grazing cell design. One is what we call a fixed grazing cell, and it uses permanent fence and stock water points. Now, when I talk about a permanent fence, if we're talking about cattle, what I'm talking about is a 2-strand electrified high tensile fence. That is a permanent fence. That's all the edge and boundary I'm looking for. A permanent water tank, you put a tire tank in like that, you're probably not going to move it next week. When you put that in, it becomes a commitment. It's a fixed point. So in a fixed grazing cell, we build permanent fences, we put in permanent watering points. This was, when we lived in Missouri, we had a 260-acre grass farm, which you go to Idaho, to desert country, and you say you had 260 acres, then they chuckle, not realizing that in Missouri, 260 acres was a 120 cow year-round grazing unit. 260 acres on our desert range in Idaho is 8 months of grazing for 3 cows, something like that. So all those red lines there are permanent fences. Now, we ran sheep also, so a lot of them, especially where they're closer together, were 3-wire fences for sheep. So it says there's 76 or 67 paddocks there. On 260 acres, you do some quick math. Most of my pastures were about 3 acres in size. Anybody, and I didn't farm, grow crops or anything, but I did make hay. back before I wrote the book, Kick the Hay Habit. And you realize what a drag it is to take, 25 3-acre pastures and mow the hay down, rake the hay up, bale the hay up, 3 acres at a time. Basically all you're doing is turning. You're just turning. So this does not lend itself to very much mechanical activity out there, even something as simple as making hay, let alone farming. And also it says there's 26 miles of fence. That says there's a mile of permanent fence for every 10 acres out there. And then we additionally split this up with polywire. See, my wife was in the fence business. She still is, along with our son. That's the other side of American Grazing Land Services, is our product side. So she was in the fence business. So I bought all this stuff really cheap. And I got carried away. There's a 8,000 acre ranch in the Nebraska Sandhills that originally was in 18 pastures, each one with a windmill and tank. And they ran, I think, 400 cows on this place, but it was a herd of 30 in this pasture, a herd of 42 in this pasture, and it was based on what each of those windmills could supply. So they were set stocked for a long time. We split that up into about 50 pastures, put in pipeline water, and all those new yellow lines in there are 2-wire electrified high tensile fence. The dark blue, is the new pipeline. So this is a fixed grazing cell on a piece of land that nobody's ever going to farm it. And it makes perfect sense to put in that much permanent infrastructure because the scale of the operation and the fact that it's not going to be farmed. So that's a good place to do a fixed grazing cell. The alternative is a flexible grazing cell. And a flexible grazing cell is we create a framework of permanent fence, and we usually use some portable water systems in this as well. And we create all of our daily management units with polywire movable tanks within that framework. So the tools that we use themselves, they're flexible. I grew up in the Midwest, and it's just like out here. I thought a fence could only run due north and south, or due east and west, and it was something, all the steel in the fence and the Earth's magnetic field. You could not run a fence at anything other than those straight lines. I didn't know that you could actually take the base of a hill and follow a fence along that. Wow. I didn't know that you could separate a ridge, because we didn't have ridges in Illinois. I didn't know you could separate a ridge based on its contour because you could make a fence be flexible. Wow. When I realized you could run fences at weird angles and curves in them, it's a life-changing experience. So, this is why flexible grazing cells work well in farming situations. The fences only have to be in place when there's cattle there. You can farm to the vast extent, have the big equipment do all that, but when the farming's over and we're going to be grazing cover crop or crop residues, then you create the fence by using this plastic junk, that American Grazing Land Services sells. There are tools and techniques available for making erecting fences easy. Now, when you say temporary fence, portable, and if you've got wildlife, there's probably going to be more opportunity for something to get knocked down, drug away. We have elk traverse our place, regularly. We have antelope there in the summer and fall. We have deer year-round, and we have almost no wildlife issues with our portable electric fences. And the simple reason why is we never turn a fence off. Even if the cattle aren't going to be in an area, for 10 months, and there's a fence there, that fence is going to stay on. That's how we train wildlife, maintain their respect for fences. And on the stock water side of it, because livestock drink so much less water in the winter, we don't have to have as extensive a distribution system as if we were grazing it in the summer. We use a lot of over-the-surface pipelines to put water points where normally we would not have them. So we have tools to make this easy. That's going back to the farm in Missouri. And if I knew in 1983 what I know today, I would have approached that farm very differently. You know, even though we weren't ever expecting to farm on it, but we lay out what we call grazing corridors. So there are these long, fairly narrow rectangular pastures. We do have to get water all the way around because we were a year-round grazing deal. But then we would have created all of our daily management units with polywire, and we wouldn't have had those 67 permanent pastures out there. In this layout here, there's only 7.5 miles of fence instead of 26 miles. So there's a cost savings there. There's a major maintenance reduction there. So that'd be a different approach. This is a flood irrigated farm, I believe in western Idaho. And just the way the lands were laid out for the flood irrigation, set up beautifully for flexible grazing cell. Basically, everywhere where there's one of those fences, there was a flood ditch out there. So that's a flexible grazing cell. It's 1,400 acres. So, whatever scale you're working at, we can make this happen. Our center pivots are a combination, fixed and flexible. Our watering points, for the most part, are fixed. Those are the blue circles on the inner circle fence on each of those pivots. But to increase my flexibility, I have a portable tank, and every other tank I have set up so that there's a float valve for the stock tank itself on a T, and the other side of the T is just a quarter turn valve with a cam lock fitting, so I can just hook a over the surface pipeline in, turn the water on, and put water anywhere else I want. So with one 500-foot section of HDPE pipe and one movable tank, I can hook into this tank, have the portable tank sitting there, and so I have doubled from 6 watering points. That's a 300-acre pivot, by the way. So I've gone from 6 watering points there to 12 watering points there, with the only additional investment being my portable tank, and as I said, 500 foot of poly pipe. And I just drag that with the ATV location to location as I need it. But we do all of our daily moves based on or using polywire. People ask me, well, how many paddocks do you have on that big pivot? I said, how many do you want? I only have 3 permanent fences: the outside perimeter, the inner circle fence, and then a connector fence that ties them together so that one energizer runs everything. And so I say, well, how many do you want me to have? I can have 10, 20, 50, 83. One year I stockpiled this entire 300-acre pivot, and I grazed it out in 103 daily moves. So basically 3-acre increments. Did that, 428 dry cows. So if we are going to graze farmland that has no fence with it, one of the first things we do have to do is put a perimeter around it so we can at least hold the animals in place. If your livestock are trained to electric fence, it doesn't take a lot to keep them in. See, okay. So a lot of you've probably done this, some of you haven't. This is the basic spinning Jenny rig that's used to run high tensile wire out when you're building a fence. You can just put a crank handle on the top of that and roll that high tensile wire back up. I've done a lot of that. It's not fun. And so generally you evolve to some kind of either electric, but typically it's hydraulic drive, because high tensile wire, you can reel up polywire real easy, with a cordless drill or a small electric motor. You can't roll up, 2,000 feet of high tensile wire with a small electric motor. A bigger electric motor you can, but most of these power winders that we deal with are hydraulic drive, and some of them will spin back a coil the same size as the standard spinning jenny does, and then others put them on a spool. We can sell you one for about $3,000, or you can build one in your shop for probably $1,000 material if you're buying everything new, and then your time and labor to build it. But you can put up and take down high tensile fence fairly easily once you're equipped to do it. I like the 2 strands of electrified high tensile as the perimeter because it carries good power, good energy around the whole thing, and it's got pretty good visibility. The animals, again, if your animals are used to electric fence, 2 strands, and they're going to stay in. Some other things you can do if you don't want to go the full fence route is use some kind of temporary fence. And one of them that's pretty popular is the horse rope. So it's a 1/4-inch braided poly rope. Good conductivity in that, good visibility. We just put it on some kind of a big spool, and again, you can do this, or you can, in this outfit, you can't really see it, but there's a place on here where they just put an extension off of a hydraulic motor, and so hydraulic motor either on the tractor itself, on the truck, a gasoline-powered motor that runs a hydraulic on a side-by-side, a lot of different ways of doing it. But you can make these big spools fairly easily and then roll up a lot of rope pretty quickly if you mechanize the process. The one downside I have with rope as your perimeter in a place like this is if it snows and it blows, rope will catch that, and you will go out in the morning and that will be on the ground, and the cows will have walked out over the drift, and who knows where they are. Hopefully in a warm, sunny spot, but probably not. A lot of people just use polywire. You drive through parts of Nebraska, Kansas, Iowa, I'm sure here in eastern Colorado also, and there's a cornfield or some other crop residue or a cover crop field, and there's nothing around it but a piece of polywire. You got well-trained cattle, and it's going to work. The well-trained, it's really based on the consistency of power that you keep in your fences. We generally figure 1 mile of linear fence per joule of energizer output. And so if you figure out that I'm going to have 4 miles of fence that I'm putting around this crop field for grazing, that's 4 linear miles of fence. We would be recommending a 6 joule energizer because you go from 3 joules to 6. The 3, we wouldn't be fully comfortable with that powering that 4 miles all the time. If you're using good materials and you put it together right, it probably will do fine. But if you put the 6 joules on it, you're going to have enough punch power there that's going to go on and on. So at the ranch in Idaho, on the pivot and the desert area that we graze, I got about 9.5 miles of fence. And I usually run that on a old 20 joule Energizer, Stay-Fix M20, back when there was a brand called Stay-Fix, and back when there was a M20. And then I'm set up that I can compare Energizers directly I just flip 2 switches and I change which energizer is powering, all the fence there. I have a 46 joule Gallagher energizer, and I put it on, or the 20 joule energizer, and basically I get the same performance out of those. The 20 is already bigger than I need. I've gone down to as low as a 6 joule on that 9.5 miles of fence. You put the 6 joule energizer on that, and the back side of the place, we will not have the power that we need to maintain the respect of the elk and the antelope and the deer. So we always go to the side of being overpowered on it, but not terribly overpowered. The 46 joule is being terribly over. So the 9.5 miles, that doesn't include any of the poly wires that I might have set up. And I currently run a cow-calf herd and a stocker herd in the summertime. And I'll usually have 4 poly wires, set up for each herd. So there's 8 poly wires running out there in addition to the permanent fence. Something that we like to do is on an existing fence, if there's a barbed wire or an old woven wire fence around the place, we like to put a single high tensile wire on an offset bracket, and that then gives us a power source along that conventional fence to where we can hook on polys or take another permanent fence off if we need to do something like that. So this is a fairly cheap thing to put up, and it gives you it's just a power conduit around the place. All right, I see the last comment there. More effective than delivering power than multiple battery units. Yeah, if you can go back in your mind to that picture of our pivots, they got the outer perimeter fence, they had the inner circles. When I first set that up, we had separate solar energizers on the inside circle fences. And then I converted it, not because it wasn't working, but I took those away and connected them with the single strand high tensile fence, so that one unit now runs my entire place. And some people don't like having all their eggs in one basket, but those connector fences were definitely cheaper than the solar energizers that I had on the inner circles. So that's why we went that way. So the basic approach to flexible grazing cells is we create these grazing corridors. And I say generally 300 to 1,300 feet wide, depends on how much temporary fence you're willing to move. And then on every other fence line, we will put stock water line. And that can be over the surface, it could be buried. Most farmers want it to be, an over the surface line, so that when they're done using it, it can be reeled up and taken off the field. I always try to set it up in pairs, and that's so we have 2 sets of paddocks off each side of a pipeline. It lowers your cost your stock water cost per acre if you're always working in paired corridors rather than an odd number. The water access points we use, and we started using those yellow cap Plasson risers, what generally most people just call a quick coupler valve, but specifically those yellow capped plastic ones. We started using those back in Missouri in about 1986 or 1987. And in my own personal experience, I've only had a couple of those that ever failed because the O-rings in them wore out, or the piece of the ball valve that gets snapped down, an ear on it would break or something. But I've only had a couple fail in a lot of years of using them. And so we use those either, or I should say both on the over-the-surface pipelines, but also if we're burying a line, we'll put typically a 6-inch or 8-inch PVC access tube down to the T on the pipeline, and then the quick couple of valves on a riser there, and you reach in the tube to snap the water hose in. If you put something in permanent like that on farm ground, you really want to build a permanent fence there also, so that those watering points are directly under the fence line. Otherwise, piece of equipment sometime is going to go astray, and it's going to take your water risers out. This is an example farm. This is in Kansas, and there's a whole lot more. You know, there's 1,500 grazing acres up here. But this piece, they were doing some no-till farming, and so this would be a farmed area. And they'd put a cover crop on there, and then have native grasses. A couple of these places, this was mixed, you know, had smooth brome in it. But what they did there was basically use the cover crop as the protein supplement for the native grasses. And so, because ruminant animals do not need to consume intact protein every day, you know, you can feed them, if you have low protein stockpiled forage, which typically the warm season native grasses are going to be, they're going to not have enough protein to maintain even, you know, a dry pregnant cow. So they need a protein supplement. And one of the ways that can be provided is through a standing cover crop or a swathed cover crop, because that's going to be high in protein. So a ruminant only needs a shot of protein every 3 or 4 days. You know, people, pigs, dogs, monogastrics, we need to consume intact protein every day. Ruminants do not. And so the way this system works is they let them in on a cover crop strip, and you figure out, well, how much are they going to need, you know, to eat? And so typically they'd only go in here for, you know, 4 to 6 hours, something like that. Eat up the high quality, high protein cover crop, and then they're going to go back onto the native grass, which is strip grazed out, you know, on a 3-day, weekly, 10-day basis, something like that. So this is an interfacing of a cover crop as a supplement for bigger area of native grasslands. Exact same concept. This one's in Nebraska, where a center pivot, in this case it's alfalfa, not a cover crop, but it could certainly be done with a cover crop also. The alfalfa was swathed, and then there's 3/4 of native grass adjacent to that, and it's the same sort of deal. Is you just give them a small wedge of the swathed alfalfa for the protein supplement, and once they've eaten that, they're not going to hang around in there. They're going to go back out to their native grass. And so it's just a matter of where you set your, you know, gates and water points. And these people, not because they were planning on doing that, actually had water points at each of these intersections here, and with, you know, with gates there. So the animals, if it's supplement day for the cows, you go and you open the gate, let them move themselves onto the alfalfa strip, and then when they're done, they go back to the native grass, and you just come back later in the day and close the gate there, set the next strip for where you're going to put them 3 days later. And so again, just interfacing cropland with native rangeland and using the cropland as a protein supplement area. So this is the basic equipment that we use, poly braid on a geared reel. I emphasize poly braid and not poly wire. So there's 2 kinds of the poly products. There's twisted wires, which if you had a 9 stainless steel twisted poly wire, you would have 9 individual strands, and then you'd have the plastic strands, and then they're just twisted into a rope or a string. Braided, if you have 9 strand braid material, you're going to have 3 of the wires braided together, and that's going to be braided with 2 bundles of plastic. You create 3 of those, and then the whole thing's, braided together. And a braided polywire is going to have typically 4 times plus or minus the distance conductivity that a twisted wire has. Because electricity moves on the surface of a wire, not through the wire. And so as soon as you start creating that cable effect by having 3 individual wires braided together, the surface area available to carry that charge is much greater than 9 individual wires. And then the physical breaking strength of the twisted wire is much lower than a braided wire. And it depends on the brand there that you're looking at. But again, it's going to be 2 to 4 times greater physical breaking strength on a braided product. I started using braided PowerFlex Polybraid in 2006. So that's 17 years ago. I'm still using some of the same reels of that braided material 17 years later. If you get 10 years out of a twisted polywire, you've done really well with that polywire. So the standard reel holds a 1/4 mile of poly braid. There is also tape, the 1/2-inch wide tape. And when we first moved to Idaho, I had tape with me that I brought from Missouri. And tape is what we had to use to train the antelope. And we used tape for about 4 to 6 weeks because the antelope kept knocking polywire down. We switched to tape, which sits in the wind and flutters like that. Anybody ever hunt antelope? One of the best ways to hunt antelope is you sit in the grass, you have a white handkerchief, and you sit there and you flutter that thing, and the antelope just walks up to you and you shoot it. But that fluttering tape gets their attention. They come check it out. They learn what it is. And so we did that in 2005. And I would say since 2005, I've had fewer than 10 incidents of antelope knocking down polywire. Whereas when we first got there, it was a daily deal that the antelope were going to take polywire down. Tape changed that. So it's not something I use on a regular basis, but special occasions like that. And then when we get stockers in for custom grazing, steers, yearlings who have never seen electric fence, we put them in the corral, and I stretch across the corral a piece of poly tape, one end of it being anchored right by where their water tank is, and then I just run across the holding pen, the main holding pen out there. I put a dedicated energizer on that section of tape. And two sets of cattle that I had come in last year, there was a group, I believe it was 148, and they were in the pen with that polywire for about 3 hours, and then I put them out on pasture. Next morning, 9 of them were not within their polywire boundary. The other 137 or whatever it was, they were right where they should have been. They learned what it was. And so I had to put those 9 in. And the next day, I think there were 4 out. The third day, there was 1 out, and thereafter, none of them got out. I had another 170-some group that came in, put them in the corral for about 4 hours, put them out with the ones that had arrived 10 days, 2 weeks earlier, who've been moving out through the pasture. And of that 170 second batch, not one of them ever got out of the polywire, out there on the pivots. So you can train the livestock to really respect fence by giving them that kind of reception when they arrive on the place. But I found that tape is a better educational tool than just polywire, and it goes right back to in the corral there. That tape is just there fluttering, and they come to see what that is. And If their first impression is a really bad impression, they don't bother it. Now, there's buying the right stuff and there's doing things on the cheap. And I bet there's at least one individual in this room who looks at this and said, what's he getting at here? So I do this all the time. And if you can do this and you're happy in your work and you're being effective, by all means do this. But when I first started working with polywire in the early 1980s, yeah, we rolled it up on stuff like that because I didn't believe that I could afford one of those $17 electric fence reels. And then I used a reel, an actual electric fence reel, and said, I can't afford not to use this. And then geared reels came, $28. This is a long time ago. And I said, I can't afford that, $28 for a reel. And then I used a geared reel and said, I can't afford not to use this because of the time savings associated with it. So if this makes you happy, well, it can't be that bad. But I like reels. I like geared reels, 3-to-1 gear ratio reels. If you don't have permanent fence around, sometimes finding how you're going to suspend your reel is a bit of a challenge. This is what we call a power post, and it's a nice device. It's got about a 10-inch spike on the bottom and a set of feet, and the body of it is a slide hammer. So that's how you put it in the ground, and you can actually hang 3 reels from it. So if you're running sheep or goats, it's a great tool. I haven't priced one of these lately. Last one I got from the company is like $118. I wish I had another picture in here from Kevin Wiltsey's place because, you know, Kevin just made some, it was rebar, you know, with a spike on the bottom and some feet on it and just little welded hooks for hanging polywire on. And he had ones that only held 1 reel. He had some that you could actually run 4 reels out from them. And I mean, simple to make, not much material, scraps laying around the shop. Most of you in this room, you know, can make a lot of this stuff that will make your days of grazing on farmland a whole lot easier. This was, I don't think there's a lot of rail fences around here. We got a lot of rail fences because lodgepole pine on the mountain, you know, you just make rail fences. But this is just a U-shaped piece of metal that has a chain link, you know, welded to the bottom of it. So you can just hang that over a rail. It could also be a steel pipe. And you run your fence out from there. These ones here are just different ideas people came up with. And then sometimes you realize you don't really need to hang that reel from something, depending on how long a run that you're making. And so, and that's an insulated, by the way, everybody understands that these fence reels are insulated. So you can set them on the ground and your fence isn't going to short out because you've set that reel on the ground. So all you have to be able to do, that strip fence going off there towards the mountain, all you got to do is just keep that up off the ground at a level that your trained cattle aren't going to cross that. And so you don't need to have a super heavy duty anchor point to put one of these reels out there. And here's a corner assembly. Reels going 2 different directions. They're stacked, it's sitting on each other there. And you don't get many reels out of that, by the way. But yeah, it's a corner assembly. One fairly, that stirrup post, the black one, that's fairly stiff. And then just, you know, 2 or 3 of the regular step-in posts there. And that's all it takes to run a line. This one, I don't know if you can see this, but so this is a single wire high tensile fence, obviously, And we do need to make this thing hot. Some people use alligator clips and stuff like that. Well, guess what? You can actually take your poly wire and just kind of loop it around the metal part of the reel and then hang it on the wire, take it off. Hey, that's an on-off switch. Just unhooking it, the handle from the wire. So we energize a lot. If we're not energizing off the other end of the reel, where we always have a gate handle on, yeah, you just make this loop here, hang it on the wire, and boom, you're energized. If you're doing some permanent fences, for a couple of bucks, maybe $2.75 or something, we can sell you a pin lock insulator that's got a steel plate with 3 holes in it. That's called a 3-hole gate hookup. And you can hang 3, gates in there coming in. It's a wonderful thing. Or you can just crimp or tie a loop like this at the end of the wire. So every time I run a permanent high tensile wire making a fence, when I tie off at that terminal, well, you can't, the corner insulator's right there. Every time I tie off at a corner insulator, I leave this much wire sticking out. I've come around the terminal end, the fence line's here, and I got this much extra wire just hanging there, and I can use that extra wire to come past my end post, put this loop here, and guess what? I could hang 3 gate handles if I wanted to in there for 1 crimping sleeve and 2 feet of wire, so less than 20 cents. I created something that's as good as the 3-hole gate hookup. That's going to cost you $2.75. And I never run out of the parts for making this kind of gate hookup. All right. Something that I've learned over the years, so this is now a poly wire. I'm creating a completely flexible grazing cell, no high tensile anywhere, just poly wire, poly wire, poly wire. What I've found is if you just take a gate handle like this and hook it into a poly wire like this, your odds of actually having any power in this fence are maybe 50-50. And if the wind blows and this jiggles, it goes away. And so the way that we attach poly to poly is I'll actually throw 4 or 5 loops, the gate handle wrapped around. This is our supply line. This is a strip fence. So this has actually got about 5, the handle looped around this fence 5 times, and then it's hooked back here. And you will have good conductor contact here, and all of your strip fences then will have plenty of power in them. Line posts, the only plastic line post that we sell is the true O'Brien. Over the last 40 years, we've evaluated just about every plastic step-in post manufactured anywhere in the world. This is the only one that I can consistently put in -20, -25 frozen ground and keep moving fences all through the winter. There are knockoffs from other companies of the O'Brien, and none of them are remotely as good as the O'Brien post in the winter. So that is our staple, one of our staples. The other post, remember I said plastic step-ins. This is the Gallagher ring top post, and it is a post that I can pretty well use through the winter. They don't go in the ground quite as easily as an O'Brien does, but they're better than almost anything else out there. In the summertime, these Gallagher ring tops, I think, are one of the very best posts that you can use. And in terms of durability of plastic, so I've been in Idaho 19 years now, 29. I've got O'Brien posts 25 to 30 years old that are still flexible, usable posts. They don't have all the original clips on them, but I'm still using them for that length of time. Most of the other, like if I got a box of 50 of a different brand of stepping posts, usually by 5 years, I'm down to no more than 5 of those posts. A steel shank post like this, it's going to last a long, long time. All right, and there's just bending around a pivot track. Pigtail posts. I'm not crazy about pigtails. Some people love them. What I don't like about a pigtail is, okay, I've pulled the post, 15, 20 of them. They're in the box on my ATV. Now I put the fence back up. I reach in to get a pigtail post, and what do I get? 5, because the pigtails are twisted together. So you're always fighting those things apart. There's no way for a ring top post to actually ever become entwined with another ring top post. So they're just more reliably, you take one out of the box and you get what you need. I don't even know why I still have the pigtails in there, except to say that there's better choices. All right, cavalry versus infantry. I still walk all my fences. I'm not coordinated enough to drive the ATV, pull a post out back here, step it into the fence here, go on to the next one. I just as soon walk. But a lot of people have come up with, really nice rigs. This was the first deal. Well, let's just put a cordless screwdriver on a spool and reel it polywire, and that works. Now, an electric motor, I said you can't pull in, a quarter mile of high tensile wire with a small electric motor, but you certainly can polywire. So it's very easy to just wire a small drive motor, to your ATV or side-by-side battery, and set up a rack and a spool for reeling up there. Having your posts easily accessible, either front or back, deal to do. Now, some other useful things, so I started moving cattle on a daily basis in 1988. We had a bad drought in Missouri in that year, and just to stretch feeds, we'd been moving kind of a twice a week deal. Every 3 or 4 days we'd move. And then to ration out the little bit of feed that we had, we went to daily moves in the drought of 88, and it worked so well, I never looked back from there to ever even think about going to less frequent move. Now, that is not telling you that you absolutely have to be moving every day to make this work. You will just get far better results if you get to, the more frequent moves, because that elevates stock density, and stock density is one of the key tools of getting the animal manure distribution uniformly back to the land, urine distribution back. So it's a deal. But you can't always be there at the right time of day to move. And so this is, of the automatic cattle moving systems, this is the one that I like best. So this is the Penzagro polywire lifter. There's a little control box up here. The top of it's a solar panel, so it's solar powered. This is a metal pole that it's on. There's an insulator at the base between the vertical pole and the spike that goes into the ground. So you do, get it solidly into the ground. The way that the fence attaches to the lifter makes this pole energized, so the cattle aren't going to come and push on it or rub, because it's going to be packing the, same 6,000, 8,000 volts, whatever your fence has in. And you set a timer on it, and when that timer goes off, it emits a sound, and the cattle get used to the sound, and it's going to raise that wire up. It just whoop, pulls it up there. The cattle, 2 years ago when I first started using this, I had 357 yearlings in a herd, and in a week's time, 350 of those were just routinely, going under the fence. When they hear that sound, they start gathering, and as it's going up, they start flowing through. And as long as the flow is there, the majority of them are going to go. The 7 that didn't get trained in the week, never did train to it. They just stayed in the previous strip, until I went out there to take fences down, move new fences up, and they'd catch them up with the group then. Some cattle are just less clever than others. Okay, so stock water. The things that determine how much water cattle need to drink, what's the temperature, the age of the animal, stage production, moisture content of the forage. Now, if you're grazing a cover crop in the green growing season, there's a lot of water in that stuff, and their need for additional water is lowered. If you are grazing dried out cover crop in the winter, they are probably going to need supplemental water unless there's snow on the ground. But they don't need near as much as what they do in the summertime. So these are the walking distances that we target. And so we look in the summer, hot, humid environments, we like to keep cattle within 1,000 feet of water. Hot, dry environments, half a mile. Cool, humid environments, half mile. Cool, dry environments, less than a mile. And then in winter conditions, without snow, less than a mile. If there's snow, I don't care if it's a couple miles if they do have to walk to water when they decide they have the need there. Permanent tank, like I said, you put a tire in that place, you're not going to move it around. So portable water systems, we use small movable tanks, high recharge rate to use. Like when we were in Missouri, hot, humid, high stress condition, I would run 120 head of 7-weight yearlings to a 25-gallon tub all summer long. Never a problem, because we could put water into that tank faster than they could take it out. So that's the key thing. You always have to be able, if you're using the smaller movable tank, you have to be able to put water in it faster than the number of animals that can get around it can drink it out. And if the water level never really goes down, they're never in a panic about where water is or not. Travel distance needs to be appropriate, though. Tanks need to be stable and easily moved over the surface pipelines. In the growing season, these work all the time. In the winter, it depends on what your source of water is. Now, that's what makes that noise, is me thumping my chest. Because we live in the mountains, we have flowing Rocky Mountain stream water. And you know what? Flowing water does not freeze. And so the way we keep our winter water systems open, with the minus 20, minus 30 temperatures, is we just let the spring water flow through the system. Tanks have overflows to drains, and it works wonderfully. If you've got a well that produces 3 gallons a minute, maximum water flow, you're not going to use flowing water to keep your stock water system open in the winter, probably. And then we have everything in between those two extremes. All right, so I already said that. Okay. This is an interesting add-on to a K-line irrigation system. This is the K-line movable stock water system. And the pipelines for that just hook into the same risers as K-line does. Okay, moving tanks around, carts. This guy here, he thought he could put a tank on a set of wheels and then a tricycle wheel in front. Well, it's fine if the ground's dry and firm. If you get a water leak and it kind of sinks into there. He left that there all summer after its, first time it got hung up to remind him what a stupid idea it was. Something like this, moving them around and setting the tanks off. This is a Tomcat tank. They're made up in Gillette, Wyoming. We sell quite a few of these, 250, 750,000 gallon models. When we first put the grazing cell in on the pivots, we put concrete tanks, bottoms of septic tanks. because we couldn't get tires. And they started, breaking down like that. So this is my Tomcat just backed up to a broken one of those. Other, various ones, these are both homemade jobs. If you can weld a pipe frame and get some kind of plastic tote, it's fairly easy to make a movable water tank. Pipe spooler with some tanks there. There's the quick couple of valves I was, talking about earlier. We've used, as I say, both in below ground application and at the surface on OT. We always talk about OTS, over the surface pipelines. Good tool. Don't put them in a riser like that. This is when you tell somebody in a general way what you want. Well, I want this riser to come up through a PVC tube. Well, I got exactly what I asked for, right? But it's not a very usable deal. And, here's the fence line. That's out there in the open. That's too far out. We like these directly under the fence line. Keep the valves close to the fence line, yada, yada, yada. So summing it up, if you were going to put a grazing cell in on farmland, limit the amount of permanent fence that you build. Think about it. All you really need is a source of power and containment on the perimeter for the livestock. Use temporary fences needed. If it's summer grazing, try to keep the animals within 1,000 feet of water. In the winter, keep them within a mile. Monitor results, maintain flexibility, and usually, now I try to sell you a book, but I didn't bring any books with me because I flew here. So but there it is. My contact information's there if you want to get in touch. And we're very easy to find on the web if you just, do a search for American Grazing Land Services. So thank you all. And here comes Clay to save the day. I was going to say, I don't know what's happening next. So.
Well, let's give Jim another big round of applause. That is a great overview.